I'll be interested to see if we get any clearer idea today as to whether the Russians told America they were going to do this in advance. Because it seems to me that the messaging we had from the US Embassy in Kyiv yesterday, essentially saying they were expecting a heavy air attack, might be connected with some advance notification that they were going to use this missile.
Let's move now to Mark Urban, defence and diplomacy expert, columnist now for the Sunday Times. Mark, welcome back. We're getting these reports this morning saying that Russia has fired an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, for the first time since Moscow's full-scale invasion in 2022. Indeed, it will be the first time an ICBM has ever been deployed against a city or against an enemy. What else do we know? How serious do we take this to be?
Well, I think it is serious in the sense that it is a kind of demonstration of capability, intent, and signalling. It may amuse you to learn there's been a bit of a debate going on among the spotters, the missile spotters this morning, about whether it is in fact an intercontinental.
Yeah, I saw that. We're not sure, are we?
Well, the range, the range it's supposed to have flown last night, which is 800 or 900 kilometers, is obviously very much below what we would call an ICBM type of range, although apparently this weapon can be used at up to 5,000 kilometers. I think it's kind of analogous to those missiles that were fired by Iran at Israel last month. At the beginning of October. So in that sense, it's not an unprecedented. I mean, we saw those extraordinary images of multiple warheads coming down from those, I beg your pardon, single warheads coming down on Israel, apparently multiple warheads coming down on Ukraine during the night. So fairly remarkable images. Clearly, this type of system, it's not particularly accurate. It's designed to deliver nuclear warheads, and they were clearly not nuclear warheads. Another debate has gone on this morning about whether they were just inert or dummy warheads, or whether they were conventional explosive. Either way, I think what we're looking at is a significant sending of a message by Russia after the US gave the green light to Ukraine to use ATACMS, ground-launched, and Storm Shadow, air-launched missiles. I mean, I'll be interested to see if we get any clearer idea today as to whether the Russians told America they were going to do this in advance. Because it seems to me that the messaging we had from the US Embassy in Kyiv yesterday, essentially saying they were expecting a heavy air attack, might be connected with some advance notification that they were going to use this missile.
Indeed. Let's stand back a little bit. We may or may not have the deployment of an ICBM into the war. As you rightly say, we're not exactly sure. We do know that Storm Shadow and the American equivalent is now being used by Ukraine to hit military targets on Russian soil. Where would you say the conflict is now? Give us an overview of where this conflict is now as we approach Christmas.
Well, look, I think I've been expecting for some time us to go into an end game. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that neither side seems able to decide the issue on the battlefield, that both sides have got quite severe problems sustaining the conflict from the point of view of the number of troops being killed, but also in some other respects, financially, and in some other respects, weapons in the case of Ukraine. So I think both sides will be looking to a way out of this. And of course, they expect a new impetus from Donald Trump. I mean, that was part of his campaign pitch, that he would end this war. So I think a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is around the different players or protagonists trying to shape this endgame or this entry into negotiation. Now, could there be in a Gulf state somewhere diplomats already indulging in these scoping talks for such a negotiation? We don't know that that is the case. It's possible. I mean, we did find out a couple of months ago that there had been scoping talks in Qatar about possibly the two sides stopping their long-range strikes against one another's energy infrastructure. Now, this was something which Russia very clearly did not stick to last weekend when they
because they did it at the weekend. Indeed.
Yeah, emphatically showed us that no such deal is in place. But I mean, I think what was interesting about that and why I sat up and paid attention, was because it indicated the general presumption is that Ukraine is in a much worse position than Russia, and that Vladimir Putin wants to keep going because he senses he has the advantage. Well, broadly, I would say that's true, but those talks of a couple of months ago seem to indicate that Russia also was feeling the pain in some of the strikes that Ukraine was making on its infrastructure. So we know other things too, of course, to do with manpower shortages, that kind of thing, shortages of troops, particularly trained troops on the Russian side, are severe just as they are on the Ukrainian side. So I don't think it's beyond the bounds of possibility that Vladimir Putin will enter into this, but he'll drive as hard a bargain as he can. And clearly Donald Trump goes into this having said he wants to stop it, but equally he won't want to look like a complete pushover for Vladimir Putin, because after all, you know, every party in this has agency. Vladimir Zelensky could also say, well, I'm sorry, but America is trying to strong-arm me into what is in effect a capitulation. I'm not going to do it. Now, how able he would be to carry on the war with, you know, the support of the likes of Poland, the Baltic states, we don't know. But we're in this stage, I think, at the moment where all of these protagonists are trying to shape this conversation going into what we assume could be an American brokered process to stop the war.
Okay, Mark, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us this morning and bringing us up to speed.
Russia has launched an intercontinental ballistic missile at Ukraine for the first time, according to the government in Kyiv. The Ukrainian Air Force said that the missile had been used as part of an attack on critical infrastructure in Dnipro, a city in central Ukraine. Tensions between Moscow and the West were already high after Ukraine fired British Storm Shadow missiles into Russian territory. The Defence Secretary John Healey has been speaking to the Defence Select Committee this morning.
This is a serious moment that I come before the committee. Defence intelligence will reveal today that the front line is now less stable than at any time since the early days of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 22. And we've seen in recent weeks a very clear escalation from Putin and his forces.
Well, he told the committee that there should be no doubt that the UK is stepping up its support of Ukraine. Jamie Shea was Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO, and he joins me now. Hello, Jamie.
Good afternoon to you, Hugo.
Thanks very much for being with us. How serious is this, the firing of an intercontinental ballistic missile? What's the significance of this kind of missile?
Well, in operational terms, I don't think it represents a massive step change, because Russia has used this missile to do what it's been doing with all of its other missiles over the last 2 years, which is to strike Ukrainian cities, civilian targets, Ukrainian infrastructure. And what it's done with this intercontinental ballistic RS-26 missile is exactly the same as what it could do with its much shorter range missiles, which it's been using, of course, in great abundance. So in terms of the hit, it doesn't represent a step change, but politically and strategically, it certainly does. We're in a now different world altogether, because this is the first time that Russia has used these intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's sending, I think, to the West a powerful signal of Putin's willingness to escalate and be reckless in the face, of course, of what he's seen in recent days with the US and the UK giving authority to Ukraine to use their missiles to strike Russian targets. And it's also something which is very worrying, Hugo, because the United States does not know in advance whether one of these Russian intercontinental missiles is a nuclear missile or a conventional missile. And it doesn't know when the missile is fired if it's heading towards a NATO country or towards Ukraine. So it vastly increases the chance for very dangerous miscalculation because of that. And it's a very reckless step forward by Putin.
We're all obviously extremely worried about escalation in over Ukraine between the West and Russia at the moment. Jamie, is Russia more worried than we are?
Well, the Russians, of course, have always been the ones to escalate first, like invading Ukraine, of course, in the first place, and then, of course, stepping up the nature of their offensive to hit Ukrainian cities, civilian targets, and the like. Obviously, not interested in a negotiated peace, but on a drive to win the war. And what the West has done, of course, incrementally, is try to block that strategy by giving Ukraine access to higher quality weapons, from tanks, of course, first supplied by the UK, then to more sophisticated air defence, to F-16s, and now, of course, to the use of these ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles. But, of course, Russia likes to control the narrative, and vis-a-vis his domestic population and also vis-a-vis public opinion in the West, the notion that Russia tries to put out that we're responsible somehow, that it's NATO that's really attacking Russia behind Ukraine, and Russia is therefore the victim, and we're doing the escalation. It doesn't, of course, tally with the facts, but it's something where the Russian propaganda machine is well versed and believes that this works. Brandishing the nuclear option, which it did this week when the Kremlin approved a new nuclear strategy, plays into that game of trying to frighten us and trying to intimidate us. But you've got to remember, Hugo, that Russia sort of promised big countermeasures against the West back in February 2022 when it first invaded Ukraine, saying to us, keep out. We didn't keep out. We've been helping Ukraine to resist. And so far, those so-called Russian red lines have not proved true in practice. But of course, going forward, always difficult to know exactly what Putin has in mind.
Finally, Jamie, there's a piece in the Times today about Russia's hybrid warfare tactics, such as sabotage, cyber attacks and assassinations and so on. How widespread do we think that kind of activity is already? And do we think it could dramatically increase?
It's been widespread for years, Hugo, well before we had this major crisis with Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. We've had a whole series of sort of Russian disruption operations against targets both in North America as well as in Europe. Any 1 week you will see, for example, Russia jamming GPS navigation signals in the Baltic area, which have led to cancellation of civilian flights from Finland and Sweden into the rest of Europe. You've seen the interference with these underwater cables. We've had 2 big incidents this week in the Baltic where 2 major telecommunications cables have been cut, although not clear yet if that was done by Russia. The whole point, Hugo, about these so-called hybrid warfare tactics is you cover your tracks. We've seen disruption of energy infrastructure. We've seen sabotage operations, forest fires, the attempt to contaminate the water at a NATO base in Germany this past summer. Assassinations, although, as we saw in the UK with the Litvinenko incident and, of course, the attack in Salisbury, those assassinations are often against Russian opposition members rather than against Westerners. Then there's cyber disinformation. There's a whole panoply on which Russia can play, always denying that it's behind them, but to try to polarize the West and to sow discord and, of course, to try to interfere with the functionality of our society, which could then, final word, undermine our ability to defend ourselves.
Jamie Shea, thank you very much indeed. And Jamie was Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO. Great to speak to you.